Test one. Testing.
Hello. Hi. Okay. Thanks, Tara. Yeah, we look good. So, how was the sound level? Sound level good? Okay. You can hear in the back line? Okay. Well, that sounds good. I think we're ready. I think we're ready to close the doors. Almost? Okay. Well, we're almost ready to close the doors. Right, almost. We're almost ready to have it happen. Right. Yeah. Well, I think we can relate to all of that. We're almost ready. So, thank you for being here. It's great. What? You're welcome. Yeah. Well, the day is warmed up. Yeah, it wasn't as warm earlier in the day. So, that's nice. Oh. Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. So I won't be tempted. I won't be tempted to say, what's this? Yeah, we could do that. Okay. Well, yeah, there's some music. Hi. Nice to see you. Did people get good parking places? Does that work out? Oh. Oh. Is that it? Okay. Yeah. So I want to do this. That's what we want. So, I've said welcome already, but this is a wonderful opportunity. It's a great group. Thank you for being here. So I can say welcome again. And welcome again to you who are here at the Leading Library. It takes a lot because there's a lot of opportunities for different things for us to do. To say, I want to go and read some poetry. I want to hear some poetry. I want to share. So that's wonderful. And those of you who are logged in for the same reason, thank you for logging in on the live stream. So we're happy that you're able to do that. I know that the whole thing was getting used to it for me. I don't know if it's been that way for you. So you're used to doing poetry and reading it directly out loud. And then you're on Zoom. And so we've been reading a lot on Zoom. And I have found it's been fine. So welcome to all of you who have logged in to the live stream. Please ask questions. So Josh will be gathering the questions, and we'll ask the poet when we get to the Q&A. So please do that. And to say a little bit about that, Kristen's going to bring the microphone around. And please wait for her to bring the microphone around, because we'd like to get the question as well as the answer. And that's been something that has been happening, and we've got the answers, but what's the question? So if you can, that would be great. And just wait a little bit and say what your question is. I want to make a lot of thanks. Thanks to the City of Milwaukie, to the Leading Library. It's a wonderful library. Thank you all for the support that you've given to the Milwaukie Poetry Series and to everything you've done for the community. Thanks to Willamette Falls Media. And our tech person tonight is Josh Reynolds, back here. Can we give Josh a hand? Josh is a magician. And so, yeah. So you post some issue, and Josh said, we'll try to work it out. And he does. So thank you. And also, thank you for the Poetry Committee. We have a Poetry Committee. Who's here? Nate's here. My lovely wife Jade is here. Thank you all for being here. And the work you do on the Poetry Committee. We do have refreshments. So there's some cookies and tangerines. Please help yourself. Well, we are in the 19th season, and we're heading up. It's pretty amazing. And we have I'm going to try to do this. There we go. We have our next to last reader for this year, who's going to be reading tonight, Jennifer Reimer. Okay, Jennifer Reimer. She's going to be reading tonight, and I've been looking forward to it. I'm going to share the introduction from my phone. She's an assistant professor of American Studies at Oregon State University. She holds a PhD in ethnic studies from the University of California, Berkeley, and an MFA in writing. She has numerous scholarly and creative publications. As a scholar, Jennifer writes about poetry, race, gender, migration, and serves on the editorial board for the Journal of Transactional American Studies. As a poet, she's authored two collections, The Rainy Season Diaries, 2013, and Keski, 2022. The Turkey translation of the Rainy Season Diaries was published by Sirden Press in Istanbul in 2017. Jennifer lived and worked in Cyprus, Turkey, Denmark, Austria, and the Spanish and French Basque countries. She currently lives in Salem, Oregon, with her husband and 2 cats. So I would want to ask, who's the alpha cat? So that'll be interesting to find. Yeah, maybe she'll tell us a little about how the weather is over in Bend. She is from Bend, and I understand she had a good trip over. So would you join me in welcoming our poet tonight, Jennifer Reimer?
Thank you so much for that generous introduction. We might need a minute here just to make sure we're back online with all of our tech, because we're going to do something a little bit different. Oh, we're good. We're back connected. Now, really hard to stand very still and talk into the mic. We're going to read from the book, but what I want to do is have a conversation about some of the origins of this project and put it in a specific context that I think is particularly timely for this summer. So this is Keshke. I don't even need this now if I'm not walking around. And so let's start with the title of the book, right? Keshke. And that's a word that I learned when I was living and working in Turkey during the years 2012 to 2017. And a lot of this project was inspired by the word itself that I learned from a native Turkish speaker, Keshke, which roughly translates into English as an expression of wish or longing. And a great way to think of it in English is the English expression, if only. If only. So keep that in the back of your mind, and we'll come back perhaps to this idea of wishing or longing, and what that has to do with some of the sentiment and the emotion that I think the book is trying to capture. But just so we're all kind of clear, right, geography is really important, a very important context to this book. So, of course, here's Turkey, right here is where it is in relation to some other parts of the world. And then there is a specific part of Turkey where that this book uses as its geographical focus, and that's the southwestern part of Turkey. So I like this map because it puts southwestern Turkey in geographical context with some other parts of the Mediterranean Sea that folks might be more familiar with, including some of the Greek islands, this sort of kind of eastern part of the Mediterranean, and some of the islands that are perhaps known to us as tourist destinations. Well, here's the southwestern part of the coast of Turkey where I found myself during the last part of my 5-year stay in Turkey, and here's a more close-up specific part of the peninsula here, which is west of the city of Antalya, which is one of the major tourist destinations. There's sort of like a few major cities that non-Turkish people know of. Istanbul, of course, maybe Izmir, where a lot of cruise ships dock. And then there's Antalya down on the southern coast. That's another really popular tourist destination. And so those are the sort of 3 cities most people know of. And so if you know Antalya, this area here is west of Antalya. And this is the geographical region that the book is talking about and explores in some detail. And it's because that's where I found myself, particularly during the summer of 2016. And I'm absolutely shocked that it is now almost 10 years since these events. So maybe some of you in this room remember what happened on July 15th, 2016. There was an attempted military coup in Turkey during that summer. I was there in Turkey at the time. In fact, I was in Ankara. And this photo down here shows some of the aftermath of the bombings that happened in the city of Ankara on July 15th, in 2016. Where I was, semester had ended in June at the university where I was working. And There is a conversation we could have about this book that is about the coup and the aftermath and things that I felt and experienced during the days and weeks and months after that event. It was not my first experience with a sort of national terrorist attack. September 11th, 2001 was my first day of college as a senior at NYU. So there's some poems in here that also were my first attempts to really reckon through poetry with memories of 9/11, thinking about that through experiencing once again the feeling of like buildings shaking because there's bombs and flames and things happening in the city around me. But that's not the conversation that I want to have with you guys tonight, although if you're interested in those kind of more documentary poetics, there are poems in this book that talk about that. But as a result of these events, once things sort of immediately calmed down in the city of Ankara, myself and other people wanted to leave the city. We wanted to get out. We wanted to sort of find some place that felt a little bit safer, far away from the kind of aftermath of this, right? And that, through a series of other events, led me down to these geographies in southwestern Turkey. So that's how I ended up, more or less, a bit of a longer story. But in the weeks after the military coup attempt, I'm down here on the coast of southwestern Turkey, trying to think through what does it mean to be living in this moment. So that's one part of the story. Now, that's not the only part of the story, okay? So some other things, and the conversation that I really want to have with you guys tonight is a larger conversation about this book and some of the other texts that it's in dialogue with and some of the other stories and questions that I was thinking through at that time and during that summer that this book is really reckoning with. And I wanted to do that with you guys tonight, especially because of this, which is happening next month, right? Are you guys familiar with Christopher Nolan's project? We have a thumbs up in the back, right? So Christopher Nolan has done a film version of the Odyssey, right? Homer's famous epic poem, and it's starring Matt Damon. And let's just, yes, I know you didn't expect to hear Matt Damon at the Milwaukie Poetry Series, but here we are. And I think it is actually part of our conversation to look at the trailer and to see how, through the trailer, Nolan is framing the story of the Odyssey. So it's under 2 minutes. Let's take a look. Oops. We had this all worked out before.
After years of war, no one could stand between my bed and home. Not even me. promise me you will come back. What if I can't?
So let's talk about this as a translation. It's a translation of the Odyssey, right? Although from what I've heard, Nolan's sticking pretty much to the traditional script. A conversation about this film, we can have that at a different time after we've all seen it. But, and I have thoughts and feelings about it and the casting of Matt Damon. But one thing I do notice from this trailer is that there's only one female featured at the very end, and presumably this is Penelope, right, Odysseus' wife. However, for those of you who remember the story, if you can remember ninth grade English class, there are a lot of female characters who do appear throughout the tale, right? And two that come to my mind, and one who's pertinent to our conversation tonight will be Calypso, but of course, who's the other one who's been made very famous in recent years by Madeline Miller? Circe, right? So there's a couple, and then there's some other, there's definitely other goddesses. There's a whole panoply of female and women characters who populate this story. But definitely from this trailer, we're getting the classic story that features a male hero on his quest. Okay, we're going to leave it at that for a moment. But this is a timely moment to revisit this story, because this film is coming out, and so this is going to be a conversation back in the popular imagination and the cultural conversation once more. Here's a map that I found that traces through the Mediterranean basis the journey that Odysseus takes on his trip after he leaves Troy after the end of the Trojan War and on his way back to Ithaca, right? The journey that takes him 17 years. And this is important to the story of Keşke because before even I get to southwestern Turkey in July, August of 2016, I had spent other time, particularly in earlier months in 2016, visiting some places in this trajectory that show up in the story of the Odyssey. Particularly in June of 2016, almost exactly 10 years ago, my best friend and I had been on a trip to Malta together. And there's a tiny little island, it's mainly just a rock, off the coast of Malta that they claim was the location for Calypso's cave in the Odyssey. And I'd also been to some other places. But it's really this trip to Malta, and here's a picture, by the way, of this very uninspiring location advertised as a tourist destination if you ever go to Malta, as the historic location of Calypso's cave from the Odyssey. So I've been around these destinations, and particularly most recently at this destination in Malta in June of 2016 with my best friend who happens to be a comparative literature scholar and professor at UC Davis. So we drink a bunch of wine and we sit around on vacation thinking about, having conversations about the Odyssey, thinking about this character of Calypso, and we go back, I start going back to the text. A story that I hadn't really thought about or cared about since high school English classes when I was forced to read it. But some other things, some other thoughts and ideas were swirling around in my head. I had already started to write some of the poems that would have ultimately appear in the book. And so I'm kind of working towards what will ultimately become a 25-poem, kind of long-form, quote, epic poem that becomes Keşke. And I go back to the text and I start looking specifically at the story of Calypso in the Odyssey. And here are some fragments of the Fagles translation from the Odyssey, which is the more famous translation that I grew up with. It was one that came out in the 90s. There was other famous translations, but this one is the kind of one that I was probably reading in high school that many people are familiar with. And here are some of the ways in which Calypso's story comes through in the Fagles translation. So if you guys, just a quick recall, right? Actually, the poem opens with Odysseus on Calypso's island. And he's been there supposedly kind of trapped for 7 years, sort of as her love slave. And then the gods intervene, and they send a messenger down to tell Calypso, now you know, the gods have decided that it's time for Odysseus to go home. He's going to have to go on this journey, and he's going to have all these adventures, but he's got to get back to his wife. And she kind of moans about it for a bit, and then she finally says, oh, okay, fine, I guess I'll let him go. And she gives him wine and robes and helps him build get himself ready to go, and sends him off with his men, and they go. And that's sort of how the story starts, right? And so here's some of the language that describes her from the Fagles translation, right? Calypso, the bewitching nymph, lustrous goddess, held him back deep in her arching caverns, craving him for a husband. In the nights, true, he'd sleep with her in the arching cave. He had no choice. Unwilling lover alongside lover all too willing. And so in the language of the kids these days, she's portrayed as thirsty, right, in these passages, right? She's like this goddess who really wants it from Odysseus. And I was, thinking about that, and I'm like, I was just sort of questioning the story of, again, Calypso keeps getting described as having this kind of incomparable beauty, as being beautiful, lustrous, gorgeous. And I'm like, was Odysseus really crying every night for 7 years because this beautiful goddess wanted to keep him as her love slave? This guy's shaking his head, right? I don't know. So I started thinking about the story and the perspective through which we get it, right? Which is, of course, the male perspective. And then here's some more clips from the Fagles translation. And these clips, again, in this little clip here, she's complaining to Odysseus and saying, why do you want to go back to your wife? Because can't you see that I'm better than her? And again, it sort of sets up this kind of woman against woman jealousy, and I'm like, I don't know. And then this passage here describes how, the gods finally convince her that she has to let him go to get on with his journey. And she's really nice about the whole thing ultimately, and gives him all this stuff and prepares him and is so generous. And again, I'm sort of like, she's not mad, she's not sad. What if there was a version of this story where she was angry? What if there was a version of this story where she was heartbroken? What if there was a version of this story where she was longing for something that she couldn't have, and she showed it instead of being sweet and gracious and pretty? What if there was a messier, darker, more complicated version of this female goddess character? So interestingly enough, as I'm working through revisions of the Keshke poems, Emily Wilson comes out with her famous translation of the Odyssey. It's now really well known. And her version of the Odyssey is famous right now because she uses this really stripped down, pared down language. It's much more straightforward. And so I went to look to see how she dealt with the Calypso character. And there's some interesting things she does with Calypso. In some ways, she lets Calypso have a little bit more emotional range, and certainly the language that she uses to describe Calypso comes through in a much more straightforward manner. And I appreciated in the scene where Calypso is arguing with Hermes, who comes down, this is the messenger who says, the gods have decided you must let Odysseus go. And she's the one who actually calls the gods out, and she says, you cruel, jealous gods, you bear a grudge whenever any goddess takes a man to sleep with as a lover in her bed. But she goes on and she says, but when the male gods take human women as lovers, willing or unwilling, right? There's plenty of examples in Greek mythology of the male gods who do all kinds of things, with human women against their will. And she says, and nobody seems to have any problem with that. But now you male gods are upset with me for living with a man I saved, right? Because Odysseus gets shipwrecked on her island. She saves him and his men, and that's where the story begins. And so I did appreciate this from the Wilson translation, that Calypso here is kind of pointing to this double standard up on Mount Olympus, where the gods are like treating things a little bit differently. But she still, has this sort of, Calypso still here is portrayed as sort of pitting herself against the wife Penelope. And, in Wilson's translation, she says to Odysseus, I know my body is better than hers, in this kind of way. That was interesting. The language here is interesting. So I was thinking about this character. I was thinking about these translations. And at the same time, also, at this moment in the cultural conversation is Madeline Miller's novel Circe and also the Song of Achilles, which I was reading Circe this same summer because that same friend, really smart friend that I was on vacation in Malta with, happened to go to graduate school with Madeline Miller. And as we were talking about Calypso, and I said to him in Malta, hey, wouldn't it be interesting, to do a rewrite of the Odyssey, but think about Calypso's story? He said, well, haven't you read Circe by my friend Madeline Miller? And I said, no, I haven't. Should I check it out? So I download the ebook, and I'm reading this on the coast of southwestern Turkey, and I'm reading what she's doing with Circe, and I'm like, wow, mind blown, right? And through all of these different things that are happening, plus some more to come, I start to ask these questions which come into and begin to shape the book that becomes Keşke. What does it mean to rework myth? How do we give voice, agency, and form to those whom history, epic, and mythology leave voiceless? And in the case of Calypso, she has a voice in the poem, but it's more like her voice gets told through the voices, essentially, of men, right? Through Homer and all of the other sort of male singer and storytellers who interpret the poem and her voice over time. And I'm going to include Christopher Nolan, in this 1,000-year catalog of male storytellers who've taken this myth, right, and voiced these female characters. Luckily, we have folks like Madeline Miller, and I would also include Pat Barker here, who's written books like The Silence of the Girls, and she does something really similar, but with the women who were involved or behind the scenes during the Battle of Troy. And if you're a fan of Madeline Miller and Circe, you should absolutely check out The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker and her other novels. And thanks to these novelists, we have these alternate visions of what these stories might look like if we were able to see them and hear them through the voices of women. And so that was something that I was thinking about. Now remember where I am in the geography, right? So here I am once again. This is the geography that I'm surrounded with. I've been reading these translations of the Odyssey. I've just been to Calypso's cave. I've been reading Madeline Miller's Circe. I've been asking these questions. And then, lo and behold, here's some pictures of what the geography of what that place actually looks like. And then I find myself in the company of my own sailor, literally, and my own boat. And suddenly the metaphors become very literal for me. And instead of also working on the level of what does it mean, to be a woman in the shadow of a male hero, I'm also entangled in a sort of very literal representation of being on a boat with a male sailor during the same summer. And so I have this really unique opportunity to explore in the very same geography, through which the Odyssey unfolds, more or less, right? And so this is the backdrop and the context for the Keşke poems, which unfold around the idea of what would it be like if Calypso could tell her own story? What does it mean to think about the question of women's longing? What does it mean to ask the question, what if? What if Calypso could tell her own story? What if we didn't denigrate or scorn women who longed for things? What if it wasn't shameful to get dumped or left by a man who loved you? What if it wasn't pitiful to want something that you can't have? Those are some of the questions that I was thinking through as I entered into these poems. And then What started off as fragments here or there soon became an epic poetry project, 25 poems, all called Keshke 1 through 25, that are dealing with mainly Calypso, but also other women figures from famous stories in literature, and also my own autobiography, thinking through these very questions. So, would you guys like to hear some of the poems? Enough talking, right? I just want to share the two epigraphs from the book because they have to do with the poems. Of course, famous poem from Jack Spicer, which references Calypso directly. Any fool can get into an ocean, but it takes a goddess to get out of one. And a line from a poem written by the poet Charlie Ann, the siren and the sailor have both been me. And I put the poems up here because I rarely read the Keshke poems out loud. They're really hard to read aloud. They don't translate well, sort of orally. They're very visual poems. I work in fragments of the Turkish language. There's a lot going on formally here. And so I wanted you guys to be able to see them as I read them because a lot of what's happening in these poems is not super capturable just through hearing them alone. So again, it's always better when I have multiple people up here to perform them with me to get the multivocality. So whenever you see things in italics up there, just imagine, if you can, somebody else's voice sort of performing these words. Some of the things in itals are fragments from the Odyssey. Some of them are fragments from other things. Some of them are fragments from overheard conversations. And some of it's just for fun. Keshke 1. Start where she, prophecy, remains. Fragment, stone, pine, trest, coast, line, caves, Calypso. Behind the azure window, the lovely goddess, the wanderer. Driven time and again off course, swept away by wind and wave, wide, wet, wine dark, sea. The bewitching sea nymph smiles at his words, 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 withholds, stroking his arm, water, line, withdraw, advance, withdraw, where, woven, chiaroscuro, ocean tossed in her house, cliff's dark crevasse. This small space widens, hours to days, form emerges as tidal rocks emerge from goddess, captive, captured, breeze blows to storm, beach wrecked, timber isle. Be not deceived if I have veiled my look. Still air spins, epic from ruin. She scrawls walls, hunts history, sings. What a rascal you are with a devious mind to think of speaking to me. Now, cast net, cast spell, bind all wishes to conceal, cunning. She swears, Keshke, by this earth and the sky above, this means the world, oh, goddess queen, this is no beginning. Keshke 3. She descends, river valley, ancient Lycia, way of flowering, oleander, fig, bay, pine, wild grapevine, trails, maquis, mint, laurel, myrtle, timber mountain, tahatlada, throne of gods. What were the right ways? What was the name that you gave her? Tumbled into wind, she dreams 100 years before Christ, the pirate chief Zenicetes, his kingdom lost. So the pirate sets fire to his house. Fiery Mount Himera, Yanartash. She imagines wife and daughters emerge from rock, burn inside. A flame that does not die by day or night. Part lion, part goat, part snake. Himera, breath of female fire. Enraged Antia, she, hybrid, dishonored. Witness these details, Mount Omurga, Jamoda Peak, winged Bellerophon, who, on all sides arrowed clouds, broke the sacred bond between she, bewilders guest and host, Zeus, his raging realm of female death, she spits in the dirt, likes challenge, myths arterial roots, down the coast of Chirala, origin of temple of Hephaestus. Barak, the TV actor, lights a cigarette, promises Keshke into risen night. She reconfigures geography, monstrous goddess of attachment, combs snakes from her wet, cool hair, one solid braid, skin of sound, bruises to remember what might have been, care, what avoidance, plated into desires not she, abandoned by Olympos, olives and dry oak, offer aching will, evidence you read what she now reads. Keshke 4. She swims in visible worlds, matter, common tongue, length of bay, leaves, fallen, dry, pages turn, margins to letter. She reads absence, a space you haven't filled. With breath, counts 4. 1, before you tumbled me. 2, swallow's nest. 3, a document in madness. 4, you who long for things. Past, replica, pirate ship, wrecked, ruins of naming conventions. She dreams that she speaks the lines of the sea, deciphers currents code, that the view is more splendid if you would come for days, for breath, space we have made, for more. Each century decoding begins again. She, star's skin, sees surface lit, back, wards against, incessant, click, clack, water and air, constellate, her body, shell, wave, spray of foam, passage through time, gateway, cast away, ward, glance away, word, spell away, out. Nothing in half an emotion is Keshke, why she must imagine shadows, water, through it, all ways. Keshke 7. She breaks away from shore, channels open sea, receding focal plane, sea surface, briefly broken gulls, beak, wing, past days of fasting, she still hungers, empties the small islands, pieces of candy, see nothing left to break, not line, not frame, wishes. Would you offer sugar, cypress crusted, Buyukada, evergreen? Remember the old pine tree, tumbled ruins, stone house, She imagines Greek again. Calypso, the lustrous nymph. Abandoned, she doesn't eat sweets anyway, does not like to wait. Beck, oh, Beck liordu. For every dive, resurface. She spins sea foam into gold threads, time without break. Keshke, breath of Elma nargile, of red achoti seeds, of Pacific spray, salt spray. She exhales into silence, fills feast of breaking fast. Keshke 12. She splits stone from Wish, the Roman chapel, ruins, belonging another one, condition secures absence, holds this promise, no one, to go, to come, to stay, to leave, myth or memory. I might claim to be nothing less than she who beckons, though you might still wish. Then Gideorum, no hero holds her back. Words from you gods who cannot bear to cover longing, to let a goddess sleep with a man, even if it is fate without threads, concealment, and still she that conceals. Skin woven, names rift, collapse light, aperture, what we leave out. She, divine goddess, binds rock to Keshke, summons gold, Pacific, backlit, caving. Keshke 15. We're going to take a quick side trip to Denmark for this one. Side quest. Before Southwest Turkey, that same year, 2016, I had just come back from spending a sabbatical in Denmark. I'd been there for about 6 months, but spending a great deal of time off and on in Denmark for about 2 years, and just ending a very tumultuous relationship. And also, I had visited Helsingør, which is where the castle that was featured in Hamlet, of course, is. So the sort of landscape of Hamlet, the backdrop for Hamlet. And so I was also thinking about Ophelia, another female character from famous literature that I kind of felt gets wronged. And I was thinking about similarities between Ophelia and Calypso. I think there's some interesting similarities to their stories, some interesting similarities between Hamlet and Odysseus. Things, of course, go really bad for Hamlet, and Odysseus gets the heroic hero's tale. He gets the triumphant return, and everything works out for him in the end. But they're both sort of cast as these very charismatic, charming men. They're both told to us by the poets as being really good with words, both Hamlet and Odysseus. Of course, Odysseus is famous in the Trojan War for being a diplomat, for being good at talking to both sides. Hamlet, of course, being very good with words until he sort of descends into madness. And so I think they're interesting. I think they're both interesting for the ways in which they use charm to sort of manipulate the people around them. So Ophelia, this is her poem. And so, side quest to Denmark. She rivers the continent, nymphs the many banks and slopes, collect thy orisons, words so sweet of breath, rosemary, fennel, columbine, rue, pressed dry between pages. She burns remembrances. No, she thinks everything. Long-longed Danube, Mosel, Rhine. Take these again across the Baltic, where garlands wear out. Northern seas or wilted prayers. Words become rivers. Mad river song. She translates one final grief. She will not cure, will not silence, form into wide mouth where river is sea broken. Keshke, waves, words denuded. She tosses away blossoms, sea-scored rings of fire echo in your halls. Her breath be all your sins remembered. Keshke 20. We're getting to the end. She could sing this sea for all time, muse many moments, change light, chant blue, green. She bows his boat masthead, belongs antiquity to siren song, open waves, swollen mouth, swallow, sailor, hero, whole. She heroes her own tale spins, lyric, epic, sea spray into sail. Keshke wins, trades hard rock, fortune, still fate. Kader, beni buraya kader getirdi, where she guides ship between shape, coastal olive trees, shift green, gray, silver. Her hands steer toward, against, shore break, keshke, from words, worlds, span knots, thread days, turn years, forms she. Keshke 22. She kindles some new intrigue, September's sand strewn, inside the hollow cave, Keshke weeps 4 days. On the 5th calypso, as for you who long for, swallows rise, return. In this version, she does not give. I know my body, not gracious this, is better than hers. She messy, refuses, raft to iron, light, lengthened water, so 2 words become this mouthful, waterfall, river bend, any place water breaks rock, cataracts, in to caves, sudden skin between teeth. After all, words measure words, remove she. Keshke, capital cities, switch power roles, reverse time, lines or composition. Went home to faith, you, set frame, picture it. On the 5th calypso, she let him go, wearing hot red circles, soundless scores, cave mouth, bruised half moons, embrace empty Keshke. Keshke 23. She slips under cover, deathless, ageless goddess. Keshke, after affect, slant of eye, swears, breath, glutted, I will not plot more. Mortal diversion, distraction. Here a new valley, deep, ruin again, rose, dawn broken. Silhouette, Fenique Marina. Ships, sails distant. Now she routes coastal caravan of gifts, wine, water, robes, and so much else too. Cliff wish, face Demre, silence, ending. Yes, I am happy. Yes, I am sure. She lies between what is near, far away Ankara, or this dream, valediction. I am always here, waiting, Banabak, Banabakma, but she looks, dissolving Keshke, the sea, salt wind, pillared wish. Thank you very much. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Letting Library. Thank you, City of Milwaukie.
Thank you for being here. So, we usually have a question and answer period now. And the way we're going to do this is please wait for the question. And she's going to end with a poem. So, okay, Kyle, and then.
Hello.
Hi.
I just want to say thank you, first of all. It's interesting to hear words that I have no idea what they mean, and I'm wondering if they are Turkish or not just Turkish, but also a few other words from other languages. Are they primarily Turkish? That's what you peppered here and there. And so let's say someone were to pick up your book of poems and they were to be able to look up, just Google those words, and that's how you get the answers to what they really mean and get the context. Is that right? True?
Yes. Yes. Most of the words are Turkish. There was one word that was written in Greek for chimera. We might know it as chimera. Or chimera is how some people say it. Yeah. There's an extensive notes section in the back of the book. Not all of the Turkish words are translated in the notes section, but they're easily look upable. You can just type them into Google Translate. Some the obvious things are in the notes section, and some things that are like snippets from personal conversations I didn't put in the notes. But there's nothing in there that's not researchable. Yeah. Thank you for your question.
I was be able to hear me, but in the cave, where does the exit? Where does it lead? If they go to the exit, where would they be?
Oh, in this one?
Yeah, where's the?
It's mostly like collapsed, so you can't even go in anymore. You can just only see from the outside.
But from just the outside, where if they had an exit, like the exit right there, where would the exit be of that cave?
We were like, it's like you're standing actually like on kind of like on a cliff, and you sort of look down below you, and they say that's down below is where the entrance is, and all you see is exactly this, and you're sort of looking up on the top, looking down below, and there's a sign up above in English and in Maltese language that advertises that. And
it just seems I went to the Great Smokies recently, and my older brother went with me, and they were advertising a cave to go exploring. I thought you see the cave from a distance, up to here, there, then you see it, take a few minutes to look at it, then walk out, but it was walking on the edges, and it was 50 steps before you got back to the beginning. But it was just a frightening experience because very little light.
I mean, I would not want to crawl into that space. And I don't know, this might be more of a gimmick than an actual thing, right? I mean, I don't know if anyone can really point with any accuracy to where Calypso's cave was. But it started a conversation that ended up being fruitful. But
because I would want to know where to go to escape.
And this one is only accessible by boat, and you're not supposed to go in there. No one is supposed to be allowed in there. And I will neither confirm nor deny that I may have actually gone in there.
Thank you for answering my questions.
Thank you for asking.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your lengthy introduction, because I would have been totally lost. But I'm wondering about the process of when you were writing it. It's obviously fragments. Did you, as you kind of thought of a fragment, did you just like write it down, or did you kind of think out the whole thing, outlining or something like that? I don't know how you could possibly write that way.
I love that question. I love talking about form, and I can say a little bit more about that because that's not something I spoke about. The other thing that I was doing is, so I had a really strict routine for myself, and part of that routine, and I would go for these, I would like work on stuff in the morning, and I would read a lot. I was reading a lot of poetry, and then I would go on these really long swims along this bay, quite lengthy swims, sometimes over an hour long. And the way that I was swimming, I would do like 4 strokes and take a breath. This is pertinent to your question, I promise. And so I was often during my swimming, I was like digesting the things that I had read earlier in the day, and I think a lot of what was coming through, I was sort of thinking along the rhythm of the swimming, and then I would get back, like scramble up onto the beach, and I had a notebook, and I would write things down with a pencil in a notebook, like not really that much bigger than the size of this book, and I would, on the sort of the size of the page like this, I would write things down like this, and then later, in the evening, I would go and I would open up my laptop and I would try to transcribe the notes I had written after my swimming and notes I had written while I was reading poetry and other books. I would take fragments of things I had read, and I would take those notes and then try to put them into a Microsoft Word document. And then I would play around using the space bar and the tab button. and I would read it aloud to myself, and I would look at it. And I would read it, I would look and I would listen to try to get a rhythm that I liked, and then to see if it was doing visually what I wanted it to do visually, if it was sounding the way I wanted it to. And then there's obviously a lot of things going on there with wordplay and with pun, like the way that I'm breaking up words so that you can take one word and make it mean 2. And that is also because Keshke is one word, but when you translate it into English, it means 2. So, and there's even more where I'm doing stuff in other poems that I didn't read, where I'm playing with Turkish words that sound like something in English, or English words that sound like something in Turkish. And so I was trying to bring all of that in to why it looks and sounds the way that it does. And it was a huge amount of revision. And so what I wrote, first drafts in 2016, was different than what got published by Early Press in 2022. That's Connie, my Early Press friend there. So there was many drafts and revisions and iterations to make it look like what you finally saw. It was a long process. Yeah.
Well, I'm really glad that you're talking more about the form. I'm really intrigued and quite interested in how unique it is. And I wonder what kind of, you emphasized rhythm is the main one, and it's also visual that you're trying to. Can you explain that a little bit further for us so that we understand what your goal was in this form?
If you think about the sound of you think about, let's just put up any random one of these. You think about the sound of Keshke, and you think about the SH, how it mirrors the wish, the SH in English, wish, and those sounds also like an exhalation of breath. But it also sounds like if you've ever been to a rocky beach, or like if you've ever had the pleasure of being on the Mediterranean, when the waves, get sucked back into the sea, and the sound that they make as the water passes through all those little rocks and pebbles, it sounds a lot like a shh kind of sound. So there's a lot going on in terms of thinking about exhalation and breath and wish and salt spray and sea foam and like the sound that water makes against rocks in this very salty, rocky landscape that I was in. So how on the page do you create rhythm, waves, but also places of rock. So think about like cataract and waterfall. And so, you'll see that there's moments where the words are like blocks, and then there's places where the words are more dispersed across the page, and that's like breath. It's like exhalation. It's like the breath that gets exhaled when you make a wish, when you cast a spell. But there's also places where those exhalations, those outpourings, come into contact with hardness, with matter, with rock, with landscape. So those are some of the metaphors that are, I think, taking shape and space across the page. Does that answer your question? Right. Yeah. It's like, how do you find a form for the wish? How do you find a form for women's longing? Especially when that wishing and longing is taking place in this watery, rocky landscape. And that's what these poems are trying to do.
I'm curious to know what you're working on now and whether your more recent work has changed both in terms of your theme and what you write about it, and as well as the format that you just talked about.
It's so hard to get away from this format because I really liked it. The first poetry book I wrote was prose poem, and I really also wrote prose poetry. And so I've been working on a series of poems that are much more prose poetry, but they do have lyric moments. But it's also really watery, so I've been writing these prose poems about different bodies of water, and that's the project that I've been working on most recently. And some of it is for this larger project. Some of it will go in this larger project that my friend asked me to contribute to. But I think there's something there that's going to be a bigger project about oceans and seas. I struggle with lakes and rivers, even though that's really sort of the land that I'm in more and more these days. But I struggle to connect with them in the same way that I connect with oceans and seas. I'm trying my hardest, you guys in Oregon, to be a lakes and rivers person, but it's hard. The Santiam River is really lovely, but I don't know. I grew up on the Pacific Coast, and it's hard to. It's the oceans in my soul. I know. Yeah, it's true. I know. I should try to do all the elements. I have a novelist friend who's writing novels. Like, he did his rain novel and he did his desert novel, and he's kind of working his way through the elements. I'll try.
Casting the fire rod up to your chest, feeling the rhythm of and the offbeats of the river, and then you will start to feel something similar to the
Are you going to take me? Okay, that sounds like an invitation.
Well, I'm pretty conversant with the Odyssey and the Greek myths, and also just in general, ancient cultures where we've been left only fragments.
Yeah.
And we are charged with, or we can't resist trying to fill in those spaces.
It's so tempting.
But it's not possible, so you kind of just keep working at it. So I get that with this, that I see cataracts and waterfalls coming down in this vertical shape, and also kind of like pathways as you try to get in between, or trying to rock climb, and then where's that next step going to go? And that tells me it's a picture, and also all the other senses are engaged with the wordplay and so on, of this character, this woman who's really, in my view, kind of a dolphin. Oh. And she cannot really hold still. She cannot really be anywhere, because she has to be in this, I guess you'd say in a way, compromised physically environment. And so her wish could never be achieved because the object of her desire is a completely different animal.
Yeah.
And it put me in mind, well, lots of fairy tales that are brought down to us, and there may be just little hints of longer stories, or they're mixed in because of people crossing from one country to another and just leaving a little bit as they go. So there's always mystery in that, but you can't resist it. It keeps calling you in. And I guess my last thought is that it put me in mind of it's a paraphrase of a little phrase about, say, two people who are from different cultures or religions or just have very different qualities. A bird and a fish can fall in love, but how can they build a home together? And I get that feeling from this. So it will never have an end.
Yeah.
And it can never have a conclusion, and there will never be an amen.
Well, I didn't marry the sailor. He's not the one waiting for me at home in Salem, right?
Right.
And that's the thing about longing is that, it's not fun when you get what you want, really. That's not the interesting story. And that's not a story that's really interesting to read. That takes away the narrative tension. Like, the tension is in the longing and the wanting and the desiring and the wishing. But, who really wants to get what they want? It's not that great, right?
Yeah, it can never be that great.
No, because it's never the thing that you imagine it to be. And it's the interesting tension is in the exploration of the longing and the desire. It's precisely the unattainability of the thing that makes it the object of the imagination.
The chase.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, thank you.
You have a phone?
Yeah. Sure. I do. I put them. No. That was that too long? Oh. I thought you guys were in for this is like a long poetry reading, so I thought you could handle it. Come on, ladies. Men are always trying to impress us with how long their poems are. We have to fight back. All these epic poems written by men who want to impress us with the length of their poem. Yeah. Okay. This is not an uplifting poem, but this one is from the Atlantic series. Atlantic. The tides have pulled the limbs from her body. Nothing floats. At night, she hears the children screaming and her breasts begin to leak. Where else is water so heavy? She forgets words for sun and light. She forgets words. She grinds the bones of the dead into a powder and mixes this with blood, a paste to stop the hunger, a paste to staunch the bleeding. Where her hair has not been oiled, it is falling out. Seabirds carry her heart toward land, where we cover our heads with burning flags.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Let's give Jennifer a big hand. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the reading. Thank you for sharing this time with us. Are you driving back to Bend?
No, I'm in Salem now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's not that far.
Well, not so far.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
This came from the village that I stayed in southwestern Turkey. So I was also channeling. It's like a wraparound. So it has a layer when you, Thanks, you guys, for being here. There are books for sale. I know everyone has a lot of things you could do on a Wednesday night.